This is a 2007 Porsche 911 Turbo, the 997 Turbo, and it's one of my all-time favorite Porsche 911 models. This car has an amazing combination of performance, reliability, practicality, and luxury, and it combines all of those things in a way that basically no other sports car does as well. Today, I'm going to review the 997 Turbo and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this 997 Turbo is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is the 997 Turbo to get with a 6-speed manual transmission and around 20,000 miles, and it's being auctioned by a great seller on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to head over to the live auction for this 997 Turbo, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the 997 Turbo with a little overview of exactly what this car is. So, for the 2005 model year, Porsche came out with the 997 generation 911, and it was considered kind of a return to form after the daringly styled 996 that a lot of critics didn't really love. The headlights, the water-cooled, it was just too much change. So for the 997, Porsche went back to a more classic, traditional style, and then 2 years later, in 2007, they came out with the Turbo. Now, this car is still a huge deal, and I'm going to get to why throughout this video, but it was also a huge deal back when it first came out. For one thing, it was actually a lighter car than its predecessor, 90 pounds lighter than the 996 Turbo, mainly due to the use of aluminum throughout the body. In fact, Porsche says they saved over 30 pounds on the doors alone, simply being lighter than the previous car. And then there was the extra power. This had 475 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque from its twin-turbo flat six. That was an increase of about 60 horsepower and about 90 pound-feet compared to the earlier car. So this was lighter and a lot more powerful. Now, like previous 911 Turbo models, all of these 997 Turbos were all-wheel drive. But what really has made this car enduringly special is that it offered a manual transmission. You could get a Tiptronic automatic or a 3-pedal traditional 6-speed manual like this car has. And these were the last 911 Turbo models to offer a manual transmission. After this, Porsche went to automatic only. So this was the last car that let you combine the speed of a 911 Turbo with the luxury of a non-GT3 911 and have a 3-pedal manual. And it was indeed fast. 0 to 60 in the high 3-second range on its way to a top speed of just under 200 miles an hour. But anyway, onto the quirks and features of this car. And I think one of the big themes of the 997, and particularly the 997 Turbo, was simplicity and practicality, and then just speed. This was a performance car first and foremost, and they didn't try any weird, stupid tricks or gimmicks. It was just basic, simple, practical, and fast. And that simplicity begins with the key, which you can see here. Porsche crest on one side, flip it over, and there's only 2 buttons. The front trunk and then a lock button, which was also the unlock button. That was it, very basic, no cool key design. It was just a key. Now, you open up the door, and the first thing you discover in this 997 Turbo is a lot of carbon fiber. You can see it all over the door panel, the grab handle, around the window switches, carbon fiber, and that continues throughout this car. The center tunnel is all carbon fiber. The parking brake handle, all around the gear lever. In fact, the upper part of the gear lever itself is also carbon fiber. And you can see more on the steering wheel, the top and bottom of the wheel, all carbon fiber. Now, these days, this isn't as special. A lot of cars have carbon fiber or fake carbon fiber trim, but back in 07, more than 15 years ago, it was reserved for the top of the top supercars, and all this carbon would have been a very hefty priced option back then, and this car has it. And by the way, one last cool thing on the door panel before I move further inside, this little piece here, this panel panel you can lift up, and it's a little storage compartment integrated into the door panel. A lot of cars have door pocket storage areas, but this one with its carbon fiber lid is especially cool and simple and practical. And again, that continues inside. The general look of this interior is not swoopy with crazy lines or weird designs or strange, like I said, gimmicks, weird stuff in here. They just don't bother with that crap. This is a simple business-like interior with an upright dash, very functional, everything laid out. It wasn't intended to look cool necessarily, just to perform and give you what you needed as you drove your sports car fast. So the gauge cluster in this car, old school analog gauge cluster, as you can see, and again, simple, basic with the tachometer right in the center, because this was a performance car and the speed of the engine is more important than the speed of the car, although there was a digital speed readout directly below the tachometer, which was nice. Now, also in this little digital display area, you could cycle through various other car information screens, as you can see, your tire pressure, your fuel range, all that sort of stuff was in this screen to give you directly in your line of vision important car information. Again, simple practicality. Now, as for the other screen in this car, the one in the center, well, maybe it deviated a little from simple. You can see the center control stack here is a mess of an enormous amount of buttons. I counted, and you got 46 total buttons in here, plus 2 switches and 2 dials. Between the infotainment, the climate control, there are a lot of controls in here. That's because this infotainment screen wasn't a touch screen. Porsche wasn't ready to go the touch screen route in 07. Some cars did, some cars didn't. This one is all controlled by buttons. And some of the buttons are just the most insane things you've ever heard of. There's a button marked mail. What even was that supposed to be? Were you gonna get your mail here in the car on this screen? You also have this little squiggly line arrow button. That apparently was to tell the nav system you wanted to redirect around whatever route you were going. And then you have repeat here. That's to have the navigation system repeat directions. So if it just told you turn left ahead, you weren't paying attention, you press that and have it repeat. These days, all of this stuff would be integrated into touchscreen menus, but in this car, there were no touchscreen menus, so everything had a dedicated button, and it was getting pretty insane. This is a great argument against all the people who say all cars need to go back to buttons. Well, there's so many things cars do now that this is what happens if you do all buttons. Now, with that said, there were some rather cool and interesting buttons in here. There's a sport button at the very bottom. You press that, and it tightens up throttle response and a few other things, makes the car feel sportier. And when you press sport, it also turns on the little button next to it. That's PASM, Porsche Active Suspension Management. It puts the suspension in sport mode as well for a tighter handling experience, which is cool. Now, to the left of those 2 buttons, you also had this one with the rear of a car and some arrows. That raises or lowers the rear wing. All 997 turbo models had a fixed rear wing compared to the standard 911 from this era, which didn't, but you could raise the wing even higher. If you press this button, you could watch it go up and get even more wing in case you really wanted to attract people's attention with your cool 911 turbo. Now, a couple of other interesting things about this heavily buttoned center control stack. For one, you could control some of it on the steering wheel. This little dial here would control, but there was just so many control options. It just didn't really work all that well. Back in 07, this was cutting edge, but by modern standards, it's crazy, which is actually another interesting point. Porsche now offers a retrofit where you can get an infotainment screen that has Apple CarPlay and it's totally modern, and it fits right into the space where this old school infotainment was. That's a neat upgrade that'll keep this car kind of seeming modern and fresh. And yes, Porsche offers it directly from the factory, which is really cool. By the way, one other cool thing worth pointing out in this center area, at the top of the dashboard, you can see this almost looks like a clock. This is actually a lap timer. It came on cars with the Sport Chrono package, and you could turn it on and time your laps as you went around a racetrack, which was kind of the beginnings of this lap timer stuff you see in infotainment systems today, Porsche Sport Chrono. But anyway, back to the simple and practical, and so we must discuss the cup holders in this car, which are tremendously interesting. Over on the passenger side of the dashboard, you have this carbon fiber panel here. You push it down, it pops open, and you can see there's some stuff behind it. it, those are your cup holders. You push them and you can open up 2 cup holders. They unfurl and then you can stick your drinks in there, but you are not done yet. You don't want to look at the ugly inside cup holder mechanism, so you can push up the central carbon fiber panel, get it back in place, and then you don't have to see that. The cup holders are out, but the panel is back in place and it looks nice. When you want to put the cup holders back in, well, you just open up the panel again. You can put in 1 cup holder and then close the panel, and so it looks good again, or you can open up the whole thing and put both cup holders back. It was an ingenious design that allowed you to hide the cup holders when you weren't using them, take them out when you were using them, and still hide the take them out mechanism. It was a really cool idea, except that these cup holders always seemed kind of flimsy to me. I would always be afraid to actually use them. But again, it was a cool idea. Vast over engineering, but it kept with these simple and practical. The cup holders are out of the way unless you need to use them. Now, a couple of other interesting storage items worth mentioning. Over on the passenger side by the door sill, you have this little storage pocket here. Not exactly huge, but it does add some extra storage in this interior. Although for even more storage, of course, you have the back seats. Yes, this car has back seats, but they are tremendously small, tremendously uncomfortable, and basically unusable by virtually anyone. But they're there to be used by children or small, daring adults if you really need it. Mostly, though, the back seats are especially useful for storage. You can stick stuff back there, of course, or you can fold down the seat back. The back is carpeted, and if you do that, then you have a fairly large carpeted area between that and the rear shelf where you can stick a bunch of stuff, gear, whatever you want in the back of your 911 Turbo. Those back seats did add some extra practicality, whether you use them as seats or as storage. But anyway, speaking of storage, next we move up to the front trunk, which is accessed in the driver's door sill. You can see this little switch here. You pull it and that pops open the front trunk. Then you come around and there's a little latch you have to release to open it up. And then this is what you get. It's actually a fairly large storage area, although in this particular car, it's taken up by the CD changer and the DVD navigation slot, neither of which you'll probably ever use in the modern era. Maybe you can just take that stuff out and get that Porsche Apple CarPlay center screen. But even with those things in place, you do have a pretty large and reasonably practical storage area up here, plus this little yellow handle you can pull to escape from your front trunk in case someone tries to kidnap you in their 997 Turbo. Now, the other notable item worth discussing up front is the changes to the front end that distinguish the 997 Turbo from a standard 997. A lot of enthusiasts may not know it, but Porsche people can spot it instantly. There were 3 big ones. One, these LED lights up front. These are actually LED turn signals. This car came out in the days before you had LED running lights gaining so much popularity. Porsche almost started that trend, but they didn't make these running lights. They are turn signals instead. Now, you also have these fog lights here, which the standard 997s didn't have. So between the turn signals and the fog lights, you knew you were looking at a turbo, but just in case that failed, the front end of this car was a little lower, a little more aggressive than a standard 997, and it gave away that this was the turbo. But the biggest and most obvious upgrades and changes to the 997 Turbo compared to a standard 911 came around the back. You had a wider body in this car to accommodate all-wheel drive, but also wider rear tires to help put the power down. And that wider body included this air intake ahead of the rear wheels that just look cool. This has become a hallmark for 911 Turbo models, this rear air intake. Porsche hadn't been doing it for very long when this car came out, but it was certainly a distinctive look. And speaking of air holes in this car, you also had this air vent behind the rear wheels that, again, standard 911 models didn't have. The turbos did, and that gave them a different look than the regular car. But probably the biggest change for the Turbo compared to the regular 911 was that rear wing. Like I said, fixed rear wing. Standard 911s didn't have that. This car did, and it meant business. A rear wing on a Porsche from this era was rare, and you knew you were looking at something special. And speaking of that rear wing, let's talk about what's under the rear wing, specifically, well, the engine. Now, just like the front trunk, you open up the engine compartment with a little switch in the driver's door sill area. You pull that, and then it pops open the engine compartment to here. You just lift it up, and you can see the engine, which really is stuffed down there, buried deep inside this car, but at least it's accessible, unlike in modern 911 models where you can't actually access your engine. You still could do that in the 997 Turbo, and you can still see the powertrain in here. And like I said, 475 horsepower, twin turbo flat six, 500 pound-feet. This engine was no joke. But of course, Porsche still had more coming. And so for the 2010 model year, the 997 Turbo was facelifted, upgraded, became the 997.2, that's what enthusiasts call it, and power boosted to 500 horsepower. And the biggest change for 2010 was the arrival of Porsche's dual clutch PDK automatic transmission. On this model, you could get the manual or the Tiptronic automatic, which used a traditional torque converter. But for 2010, the dual clutch came, and most 997.2 turbos have it. That's because Porsche was pushing it like crazy on people. It was faster than a standard car with a manual transmission, and it made Porsche more money. And after the 997.2 Turbo, the manual was gone. You could no longer get a manual 911 Turbo, and that's what has kept this car so desirable for so many years. It was the combination of everything: the speed of a turbo, the luxury of a 911, the manual transmission, the practicality of a Porsche. It had it all, and it was the last car to do so. Now, believe it or not, the original sticker price for a 997 Turbo, base price, was around $130,000. That was all. These days, 911 Turbos can easily crest the $200K mark, but even crazier, that's about what these cars still sell for, because they've remained so desirable since it really was the last of its breed, the last manual transmission 911 Turbo, this car. All right, time to drive the 997 Turbo, and I gotta tell you that this is one of the greatest modern sports cars in the world. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, Doug's selling this car, so he's saying all these great things about it. No. I have been very clear for years with my friends, with my acquaintances, with my enemies, with my viewers and readers, anyone who will listen to me, that this is one of the greatest modern sports cars that a human being can buy. And the reason is it can do everything. And not only can it do everything, but it does everything fantastically. So here's why this car is so great. Number one, it is fast. 0 to 60 in the mid to high 3-second range. It is a legitimately fast car. And it's not fast in the, oh, it's 15 years old, so it's fast by old standards. No, 0 to 60 in the mid 3s. This is an actually fast car. And the 0 to 60 time doesn't even really tell the whole story, because when you're in the mid range, that's when this car is amazing. You're at 50, you downshift on the freeway, couple gears, and just launch it. It feels just as fast doing that as it does 0 to 60. On that point, I shall now demonstrate. I'm in second here. Oh! Yes! Love this car so much. My God, it's so fast. Oh, and it's so easy. This is one of the best clutches and shifters that has ever been produced by any automaker at any time. It is so easy. It's so easy to rev match. It's so easy to get it in gear. The shifter feels just so easy, so relatively light and yet precise, not rubbery, not notchy. The clutch is just fantastic, linear, easy travel. It's just so good to drive this car. Every time I drive a 997 Turbo, it's so dangerous because I come away thinking, why don't I own one of these? And so that's actually a good question. Why don't I own one of these? Well, that kind of starts to hit on some of the other stuff this car is good at, which is it's practical. You have back seats. No one uses them, but they're there. This car is also all-wheel drive, so you could drive it in the winter if you needed to, in rain or whatever. You can actually use this thing without worrying about it. And it's nice in here. It's luxurious. You have heated leather upholstery. You have this screen, which, while not that great, you could retrofit the CarPlay thing and have like a literally nice interior, and obviously an upscale brand name as well. That's actually the thing that has kept me from buying this car. I have enough money and space to be able to buy stupid cars as sports cars, the Ford GT and the Carrera GT, which are not realistic vehicles. The person who this car is for is the person who maybe has space for one performance car and doesn't really want to have something as compromised as a Ford GT as their sports car. Maybe they need to occasionally carry kids or stuff or whatever, but they still want to own a sports car. Well, the way to do that is with the 911 Turbo. I think it's almost too practical for me, but it's so perfect for so many people who want a sports car and don't necessarily want to go crazy with one. Now you're thinking, well, why not get a 991 Turbo? Well, because this car has a manual transmission, and this was the only Porsche that did the following things. Number one, it objectively looks amazing. I think the 996 Turbo that came before this also looks good, but a lot of people don't, and so if you don't count that car, all right, fine, the 997 Turbo looks amazing. Now, so did the 993 and the 964, but the difference is this car is very reliable. 993 Turbo, 964 Turbo, well, let's just say they weren't. They're amazing cars with amazing character, more fun to drive than this car, but I wouldn't drive them daily, let's put it that way. The 997 Turbo is reliable enough to drive daily, and it doesn't lose value. This car has never lost value. It has ebbed and flowed a little over time. It was 130 new, it probably dropped down to the 70s, but then it came back up. It's come down and up a little bit with the whole COVID car prices going crazy and then whatever. But it's not like gonna be cut in half. You're never gonna have that issue. This is a 100, 130 car. It'll be a 100, 130 car for years to come. Could drop to 90, 110, 120, but it's not falling. And that's the coolest thing about this car. You can use it often, it's reliable, and yet it doesn't lose value. Like it has everything. And I think that as a result, this is one of the greatest all-around sports cars that has ever been made. It's better than its predecessors because it is modern car fast and modern car luxurious, and it's better than its successors because it still has a manual transmission, so it feels analog. You steer around corners and curves and it is planted, it stays on the ground. The wide body in the back helps keep this thing gripping, and it makes you feel so confident and so capable that you can do just about anything. And of course, this particular one with only 20,000 miles is especially nice and special. 20,000 miles stick in a cool color. Oh, I love this car so much. Maybe I should buy it. And so that's the 2007 Porsche 911 Turbo, the 997 Turbo. This is truly one of my all-time favorite Porsche models, and the market seems to agree because these cars have never really dipped that much in value. They're just so desirable and so good at so many things, and you can get this one on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give the 997 Turbo a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 64 out of 100, which puts this in some pretty serious company, tying the Ferrari F430 and just a step behind the Mercedes SLS. But such is the amazing dual purpose of the 997 Turbo. An SLS is more fun, something like a BMW M5 is more practical, but basically nothing combines fun and usable like the 997 Turbo. And it's not losing value, which only adds to the appeal. I love this car. Love, 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 love. And I think in 50 years, it's going to be remembered as one of the very best 911s, if not one of the very best Porsches total from this era.